Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this Drugs Don't Work in New Jersey Drug-Free Workplace webinar, Marijuana in the Workplace and the Challenge of Impairment. Appreciate everyone taking the time today to be with us for this educational program. And the Partnership for Drug-Free New Jersey is happy to provide this information and this member update. And welcome to our members and welcome to our attendees who are not yet members. So we appreciate you all being with us. Just want to remind you that we recommend that any employer with a specific issue related to substance use consult with a competent legal counsel. We're so pleased to have two expert speakers with us today, Dr. Maruba Anwar-Paris, who is a board-certified emergency physician and medical toxicologist with Rutgers University at New Jersey Medical School, University Hospital, and New Jersey Poison Information and Education System in Newark. Welcome, Dr. Paris. Thank you for being with us today. And Jeanette Kessler, our Safety and Risk Manager with Atlantic County Utilities Authority. So I appreciate both of our speakers taking the time today to share with us all of their expertise and knowledge. And so I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Paris, who's going to talk to us about the effects of marijuana. Dr. Paris, welcome.
Thank you, Angela, for the lovely introduction. I wanted to thank the organizers for putting this webinar together and inviting me to speak on this very important topic. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be speaking to you about marijuana and mostly its clinical effects and the evolving knowledge base that we have with the changing times and how it affects job performance to some extent. So next slide. Okay, so again, in the next 15 minutes, we'll cover some terminology, marijuana versus synthetics, some of the clinical effects as it relates to the acute, chronic, toxic, and adverse effects, marijuana and driving, and extrapolate that to daily activities and job performance, and a little bit on drug testing as well. Next slide. So before we go on any further, I just wanted to disclose that I have no conflicts of interest here. Next slide. All right, so let's get into it. So marijuana is the most commonly used illicit drug in the United States. And although it may be legal on a state-to-state basis, in the eyes of the federal government, it's still a Schedule I drug. And marijuana is interesting in that on a day-to-day basis, there's a lot of terminology for it. People use all sorts of terms to describe marijuana or its, different kinds of products. You may have heard of it being referred to as cannabis, which is synonymous with the marijuana plant, or cannabinoids. That's more often used kind of in the scientific research community. And the word cannabinoid really refers to a wider group of these active chemicals that are found in the marijuana plant. And there's also a ton of street names, and honestly, I cannot keep track of it. And here, for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to be referring to marijuana mainly as parts of the cannabis sativa and indica plant. So the leaves, the flowers, the stems, the seeds are usually dried and smoked directly or extracted from the plant to release the phytocannabinoids or the plant-based cannabinoids, which are the active and psychogenic compounds contained in marijuana. The phytocannabinoids from the plant can be extracted as well and used in other forms that can be formulated into extracts, oils, concentrates, teas, capsules, tinctures, and vaped or infused into edibles like candy and baked goods, to name just a few. Next slide. Okay, so there are more than 60 phytocannabinoids contained within the cannabis plant. However, the main ones responsible for the clinical effects that we're interested in for today's discussion are THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, and CBD, or cannabidiol. Delta-9 THC is the main psychoactive component in marijuana. And that is what creates the high, quote unquote, of the feeling of described as euphoria, relaxation, and dissociation. CBD, on the other hand, is a non-psychoactive compound, but it actually enhances and modulates the effects of THC in the body, and it has some other functions as well, in pain, in the immune system, that might also enhance the calming effect. And there is a lot of research going on with CBD, but those aren't completely established yet. Next slide. Okay, so as I briefly mentioned earlier, cannabinoids are a much larger group of chemicals. Cannabinoids are basically any chemical compound that have a very specific signaling pathway in our body and affects our basic body functions like appetite, pain, pleasure, memory, and it also has functions in the endocrine and immune systems. And again, phytocannabinoids are the cannabinoids found in plants. And we actually also have endogenous cannabinoids in our bodies. They're naturally just produced in our bodies. And some of you might have heard anandamide is an example of this. There's a lot of research that's been done on that molecule. Then there are synthetic marijuana and cannabinoids, which are modeled after these naturally occurring chemicals, but they're produced in laboratories. And there are hundreds of synthetic cannabinoids found these days. They're constantly changing and reformulating. You might have heard of some of these being referred to as K2 or spice. These group of chemicals are not marijuana. They do not have the same effects as marijuana. In fact, they have a very warped effect on the body, and their effects are actually more similar to amphetamines, ecstasy, cocaine than that of marijuana. And synthetic cannabinoids have been associated with very severe toxicity, leading to severe agitation, delirium, hyperthermia, muscle breakdown, kidney failure, bleeding, and death. Next slide. Okay, so let's take a little turn here and talk about the clinical effects of marijuana. We're going to start here with the acute effects and then speak more about the chronic, toxic, and adverse effects. So acute effects, what we mean by that are the effects the body manifests after a single or short-term use. These are also affected by the amount and what kind of marijuana is used, as well as whether the user is a chronic user as well. So when smoked as a rolled up cigarette or a concentrated vape, the effects occur within minutes and they last a short period of time, about 1 to 4 hours. And when an oral form is ingested, an oral form of marijuana is ingested, like a gummy, the effects can take much longer to start, maybe about 1 to 3 hours, but there is a more significant delay overall than when smoked. And the effects can last a lot longer, sometimes 12 to 24 hours. But again, it all depends on the formulation and dose. In general, the acute effects of marijuana are due to predominantly THC and psychoactive and have a psychoactive effect, such as relaxation, but also heightened sensory awareness, slowing of time, giddiness, laughter, increased appetite. But there can be also more systemic effects, like increased heart rate or blood pressure, conjunctival injection or bloodshot eyes, xerostomia, or dry mouth. And the acute effects of marijuana is also very different, and really important to know that the effects are very different when combined with other drugs like alcohol, cocaine, opioids, or really anything else. Next slide. Okay, so the chronic effects are the effects that occur when marijuana is used habitually over a long period of time. They're very different from the acute effects, as discussed. There's a good bit of evidence now to show that habitual marijuana users might be at an increased risk of having myocardial infarctions, also known as heart attacks. And it's also been linked to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and infertility. Some studies have been done to see whether there's a link between marijuana and cancer, lung cancers, like there is with tobacco, but that has not been established. And there are a lot of chronic psychiatric effects related to habitual marijuana use, the most significant of which are substance use disorders, addiction, and dependence. And there's also, with the cessation of marijuana, there is a significant discomfort that is associated with that. And some even describe it as a type of withdrawal syndrome, but that's also a range of symptoms that can occur. And some of you might have heard of something called amotivational syndrome with relation to habitual marijuana use, or that habitual marijuana users become lazy and unmotivated. This actually doesn't seem to be established. They've done a lot of studies on this, and it doesn't seem to kind of pan out. There's more evidence that possibly it's related to concurrent depression than the actual effects of the marijuana use. And some of you also might have heard of something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. This is a lot in the news nowadays. It's also called cyclic vomiting. And it's probably in the news more because we are seeing this more often in the emergency departments and hospital admissions as well. It's a syndrome caused by chronic marijuana use and is characterized by severe nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. And it's hard to treat with the usual anti-nausea medications that we use in the hospital. And again, the incidence of this seems to be anecdotally increasing, and a lot of these patients find profound relief with hot showers, which is related to its pathophysiology. The only real treatment, long-term treatment for this is complete cessation of marijuana. Next slide. All right, so the toxic effects. This is kind of what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And toxic effects occur due to unusually high doses of THC. So although toxicity from marijuana remains relatively uncommon, we are receiving more reports of toxicity to poison centers across the country, as we're seeing in emergency departments and hospital admissions. And this is most likely due to the decriminalization of marijuana. And it manifests in neuromotor symptoms like decreased coordination, decreased muscle strength, decreased hand steadiness, also severe somnolence, sedation, lethargy, postural hypotension, inability to concentrate, or almost like a delirium, decreased psychomotor activity, slurred speech, slow reaction time. But the more kind of life-threatening or more significant symptomatology from toxic effects are related to transient psychoses, dangerously fast heartbeat, and arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation. And we're also seeing more and hearing more about toxicity related to marijuana, probably because the formulations are changing. The botanists who work with this kind of have evolved the marijuana plants in a lot of ways and developed, and they're developed with higher concentrations of THC. So in, say, a rolled up marijuana cigarette in the 80s might have contained 4% THC. Now the same cigarette might contain upwards of 12% of THC. We're probably also seeing a lot more of this because of the partially regulated allowable concentrations of THC in edibles, depending on the state. And they're also including THC compounds that were not predominant in the marijuana plant before, or in edibles, like delta-8 THC, which is a naturally occurring phytocannabinoid. But they're also including synthetics very similar to phytocannabinoids, like THCO. And again, THCO is a synthetic compound. It's not naturally occurring. And as I mentioned before, anything that is synthetic has a different toxicity profile to that of marijuana alone. Next slide, please. A majority of the toxicity we are hearing about are being reported in children. And you can see in this chart, pediatric edible cannabis ingestion have been increasing since 2017. This chart goes up to 2021, but we're seeing the same uptrend now in 2023. And smaller children are at particularly high risk for toxicity from edibles because of the sometimes unregulated large doses found in edibles, and all because these edibles are infused into candies and baked goods and other bright products that are very attractive to children. And they are also, they also have much more profound toxic effects when compared to adults. So things like coma, dangerously fast heart rate, or abnormal heart rhythms are being found more often in children. And we're also seeing very significant toxicity like difficulty breathing or apnea, sometimes requiring intubation or ventilatory support to get them through the intoxication. And in terms of older adults, adolescents seem to be at particular risk for first-time psychotic breaks when under the influence of some of these marijuana products. Next slide. So as opposed to toxic effects, adverse effects are unwanted effects from normal recreational doses of marijuana. A lot of the adverse effects from acute use are pertinent to performance of daily or work-related activities. And some of these that are important are impaired short-term memory, motor coordination, and altered judgment. When it comes to long-term use, some negative consequences that might impede job performance are addiction and psychiatric disorders. Next slide. As mentioned in the previous slide, we can extrapolate from adverse effects related to acute use and apply it to on the job performance to some extent. So one study done by the National Institute on Drug Abuse found that employees who tested positive for marijuana had 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% greater absenteeism compared to those who tested negative, although that study did have significant limitations due to the study design. But on the other hand, there is very good data, so very good real-time simulated as well data looking at marijuana and how it affects driving performance. And we know that driving after using marijuana is driving under the influence. Studies show that driving after marijuana use reduces reaction time, decision accuracy, ability to stay in the lane, vigilance, and ability to avoid obstacles, to name a few. And in terms of traffic accident data, we see that marijuana is also frequently found in drivers who are fatally injured in traffic accidents. Next slide, please. We can segue a bit to discuss drug testing for marijuana. I get a lot of questions on drug testing in and out of the hospital. As a rule of thumb, all drug testing must take into account the clinical context and limitations, such as false positives and negatives for the given test. There's a lot of different ways to test for marijuana. Most are testing for THC and its metabolites. Quantitative testing using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry are the most specific and sensitive, but those are done in very particular scenarios and not, more rarely used, you could say, than urine drug screening, which is the most common. But urine drug screening is a lot more nuanced in that it is almost impossible to detect or determine acute use using a urine drug screen. So what I mean by that is after a one-time single use in a non-chronic user, the urine will be positive for THC for 2 to 3 days. And then in a chronic user, THC might be detected in the urine for 3 to 4 weeks after the last use. And then there's also drug testing that is done using hair and sweat, which is extremely unreliable and not sensitive, not specific for marijuana. And I usually don't recommend it being used. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, available marijuana products are rapidly changing. Synthetic marijuana is not the same as marijuana. Toxic effects from marijuana are more frequent and severe in children. We are learning more and more every day about the long-term effects of marijuana. Marijuana leads to driving impairment and is associated with traffic accidents. And interpretation of drug tests for marijuana can be challenging. Next slide. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your attention, and I really hope you found the information I presented helpful in some way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Paris. Absolutely. The information you shared with us was so comprehensive. Appreciate everything. If you, I know there's a number of questions for you, so if you could just hold on and we'll take those after our next speaker. We'll come back and get all the questions that everyone is submitting. So thanks so much. And
Thank you.
now I will turn the presentation over to our next speaker, Jeanette Kessler, who's the Safety and Risk Manager at Atlantic County Utilities Authority. Welcome, Jeanette.
Hi. That is not my first slide. There we go. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Angela, and thank you, Dr. Paris, for a great presentation. I'm actually here to talk to you more about the day-to-day dealing with suspicion in the workplace. What do you do if you think someone is under the influence, and how we deal with it here at ACUA? Next slide, please. So back in February of 2021, CREMA was passed. Most of us know what that is. It was the law that went into effect, which outlined rules and regulations for legalized cannabis or recreational use in New Jersey. So, you know, we're here today with the Drug-Free New Jersey group. We're talking about our rights to be drug-free, yet New Jersey has passed some laws regarding recreational use of marijuana. How do we maintain a drug-free workplace when there are laws that allow it to be recreational? I always try to put into people in the workplace, people's mind, just how I might have a glass of wine with dinner with friends on a Saturday night. That is the intention of the legalization of recreational marijuana in New Jersey. Cannabis is still a Schedule I drug under federal law, but in New Jersey, people are permitted to smoke and carry marijuana as long as they are compliant with the CREMA regulations. Next slide, please. So what we know about CREMA and what leaders, what you have to know in your organization, what people need to be cognizant of is that you still have a right to do criminal backgrounds. Our facilities here in Atlantic County, we are still doing criminal backgrounds. However, we're doing them, but if there's any adverse report related to marijuana, criminal history regarding marijuana, you are no longer allowed to use that information to make employment decisions. You're still entitled to get the information, to do the background checks. You're not entitled to use that against an employee. You can still conduct pre-employment drug tests. However, you cannot make an adverse decision on an employee for a positive marijuana result. I know that seems, you know, well, why bother testing? What we have done here in Atlantic County is we have removed the component of marijuana testing just so that we don't have that temptation for people to hold it. It's hard to put something out of your head once you know it. So if we're not testing for it, we don't know it. So we're testing, we're doing a complete drug test sans without the marijuana testing for pre-employment. You can't make an adverse decision. And you have to look at it as what is legal in the state of New Jersey. It's contradictory to everything that we've ever thought and ever known. It has taken a lot, especially government entities, schools. Here we're responsible for the garbage pickup in the community, Department of Public Works, that kind of stuff that are considered safety sensitive positions. Doesn't matter. We'll talk about CDL a little later, probably in the question section, because that's not part of this presentation, but I'm sure that will come up. But we have to look at it like that glass of wine on a Saturday night. That's how we have to look at it. Employers, while marijuana is legal, employers are still permitted to enforce that drug-free workplace. So how do you do that? How do you balance all that? Employees can't be high while they're at work, but yet they're allowed to use marijuana. And any employee that's suspected to be under the influence, you have to have a plan in place. You need to have a written procedure in place in order for this to be successful for your organization. Keep in mind, a positive result, if you suspect something and someone tests positive, that positive result alone is not enough. That's not going to stand up in a court. Next slide, please. In order for you to have something that stands up, something that holds up, you have to have a process in place that includes what your process is. 5 steps. These 5 steps, I can't guarantee it. I suspect I recommend that you talk to your organization's attorney about your best practices. These are the best practices that work for us, that we've had in place, that are tried and true. We have 5 steps. If you could go on to the next slide, please. The 5 steps are observe, confirm, document, confront, and test. So what does that mean? When you observe, when you see something, when something's not right to you, you're observing it. Then you must confirm it. How do you confirm it? It's not enough for me to say, hey, that guy smells like marijuana, I'm going to pull him out for a test. I have to confirm that. How do I confirm that? I have to get another person with me. Sometimes I'll get HR involved immediately. That's best practices to get HR involved. But if it's a Saturday night and you have a shift on duty and HR is not around, what do? You have to have 2 leaders at a minimum that are confirming it. You're going to confirm it with documentation. We're not going to the next slide yet, but when we do go to that next slide, you're going to see the form. I have the actual form that we use to document. And it's a great form because it really does provide protection. The confront, once you've documented your suspicion, you confront the employee, and then you test. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is my actual form that I use here at ACUA. And I tell you this because I'm a risk manager first and foremost. This document needs to be accurate, okay? Think of when you're filling out this document that it may end up in a courtroom someday. So the employee's name, spelling, try to get it right. Don't leave AM or PM uncircled. Don't leave something unchecked because this document could end up in court. Any document that you fill out in the workplace, you should try to have it as accurate as possible. But with something like this, really pay attention to the details because it could end up in court. We have a list that has behavior, appearance, and speech. And of course, body odors, alcohol and marijuana, you can sometimes smell, but smelling things alone is not enough. You have to have you have to have enough. You have to have enough information to support your suspicion. And you have to have 2 folks, best practices, you have to have 2 folks that are signing off on it, a supervisor and a witness who could be another supervisor. We stay away from coworkers as much as we can, just because that never is a good practice. Someone from HR or another leader supporting what someone suspects. When I'm doing this in person, I actually set up 4 chairs and I demonstrate how to physically transport a person for testing. Because believe it or not, that becomes an issue. How do you transport that person? And without getting into it, it's much more fun when we do it in person. We have people almost playing musical chairs. I have the front seat, back seat, and front seat, back seat, passenger and driver's side chairs set up, and I have people physically sit in them and demonstrate how we're going to transport. The bottom line of it is you want the driver protected at all times. And the only way to do that is to have the driver driving, have the second person who's supporting sitting behind the driver, and the person being transported for testing behind an empty passenger seat. So they're sitting next to the support person and they're sitting behind the driver. That's the best way to transport someone when you're in that type of situation. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll talk about what, reasonable suspicion being confirmed. You take them, you transport them, the 2 levels. You're accompanying them. When you take them for testing, you are staying with them until the testing is complete. You're not leaving them there. You're not calling someone to, you're just staying with them until that testing is complete. Once you have a response, and be mindful, you will never get a positive that day. Why? Because any test that's taken, they will take 2 samples. And if it's going to be a non-negative, if it's a positive, it'll be a non-negative. That will be the first sample. They break the sample into 2 parts. The second sample will be sent out to a separate lab for confirmation. And that's, to protect your organization. That's for everyone's protection. So you'll never get a true positive that day. You'll get a non-negative. But be mindful that you've documented on your reasonable suspicion checklist or your reasonable suspicion form, you have documented already that 2 employees from your organization suspect a person of being under the influence. With that in mind, you cannot let that person drive home. You can't leave that person, just to do whatever they want to do. You need to make sure that that person has either a ride home or that you're dropping them off at their home, that they are taken care of, because you've already documented your suspicions. So to protect yourself, you want to make sure that that's documented. The next 3 slides we're going to go through pretty quickly because they're all part of each other. So if we could move on, back in January of 2018, there were 5 substances that were added to random drug testing. These are part of pre-employment drug testing for our organization and for many organizations. You could move on to the next slide. We have their actual names, and the following slide is the street names for these products. These are all now part of CDL testing, and we use them for pre-employment testing. And why this is so important is because a lot of these products before 2018, they weren't part of testing. A lot of these products are something that people may have in the cabinet left over from a toothache or a backache. And it's very important that employees know, don't take, if you had, physical therapy for a rotator cuff surgery a year and a half ago and you kept a few pills, don't take it if you have a toothache, because if you are displaying something with reasonable suspicion and you get tested and this comes up, if it's not prescribed for you for a current medical condition, you're going to fail the drug test. So letting people know that these are things that are tested for if your organization is testing for them. It is something that needs to be shared with people. I'd like to talk about an EAP program next. If we can move on to the next slide. An EAP, an employee assistance program, we have one here. We recommend it to everyone. With an EAP, help is only a phone call away. EAPs can provide employees with all types of assistance. However, you can't wait until it's too late. If you suspect something, there are signs before that reasonable suspicion where you can intervene and possibly help someone before it's too late. We can move on to the next slide, please. Leave in attendance. If we talk about people who have unexplained or unauthorized absences from work, if they're always late, if they're using, that Friday, Monday pattern, they're using their sick time up, emergencies, the people have the worst luck ever. Those are all red flags. Those are things that you might not have enough on your reasonable suspicion checklist that day, but these are all things that you might want to start that conversation with the employee. Offer an EAP. You can't make assumptions, you can't accuse, but these are signs think, hey, is everything going okay? Hey, just a reminder that we have an employee assistance program available. It's helpful to kind of start these conversations before it's too late. Next slide, please. We'll talk about some performance problems that you may have with employees, such as missed deadlines, or they used to be the best worker in the place and now their work is incomplete, sloppy, and it's a mess. They're making excuses. They're having incidents that don't necessarily make sense, that are not witnessed, and maybe the timing of them is convenient for an extended weekend or something. In jobs that require more time, people are able to hide this. If I have a 3-week deadline, people might not know that I'm not working on that project for 3 weeks because, it's not due until the third week. So day-to-day employees that are public works, people picking up trash, electricians, you're more likely to see the problems, the performance problems on a daily basis. But people with longer detailed analysis type works, you might not see the problems readily. The next slide, please. Interpersonal skills and communication, being argumentative with coworkers, difficulty in recalling instructions or directions, this person complaining or people complaining about this person not making friends, not being able to be part of the organization, not melding with the other group's morale issues. These are all things that are warning signs, that we not that the person's using drugs, but that could be red flags, and that should start that conversation, because it is too late. Once that reasonable suspicion form is out and being filled out, it is too late at that point. And, we don't want to get to that point. So next slide. I want to thank everyone for your attention. I know that there's always a lot of questions related to the process. So I'm going to cut it off there, and we'll see where the questions take us.
All right. Thanks so much, Jeanette. What a great presentation about what you're facing, right, on a day-to-day basis. And I know within the chat, there was so much feedback and positive feedback on the form that you shared. A lot of questions kind of on that as well. So we'll go to the questions. I know one of the number one questions we're seeing if you'll receive a copy of the slide presentation and a recording. And yes, we'll be sharing that after the event, so everyone will get a copy of what was spoken about today. I guess, Dr. Paris, I'll go to you. There was a question about, we're talking about marijuana today, and we're talking about being able to identify, but what about alcohol and opioids? Can you speak a little bit about, and other drugs? Are there any other ways to spot out alcohol or drug use, such as opioids, amongst my employees?
Yeah, so in general, drug intoxication can be a little bit difficult to identify, especially, there's a lot of functional users as well who actually will only function normally because of their addiction and dependence after they have, say, an eye opener in the morning in terms of alcohol, or their daily dose of oxycodone in the morning. And they clinically might actually not appear intoxicated. There's a large number across the country in that way. So, we can only really detect it when it becomes clinically apparent and obvious. And in the hospitals, that's often how we might diagnose it. Someone might be brought into the hospital. There might be a suspicion, and we'll look for certain clinical signs and symptoms in terms of their, pupils and their conjunctiva, their, skin and their, mucous membranes, and determine whether there might be some sort of drug involved causing the primary presentation. But on a day-to-day basis, it can be hard. And I think Jeanette spoke to that. You need plausible suspicion from multiple eyes, I think, on a day-to-day basis, but it can be quite difficult.
Thanks. And Jeanette, I know you kind of touched on opioids and alcohol and other drugs. Anything you wanted to add in your screening process?
Sorry.
That's okay.
So, I mean, I think that it depends a lot on the organization, and I've been taking a glance at a lot of these chat questions here, and there are no, some of them I can easily answer, but some of them are very specific. It depends on the policies and the procedures that are in your organization. We have to follow the laws, and a lot of organizations are late in following that law regarding CREMA and the what is now permitted. But you are entitled to have a drug-free workplace. But like I said, the law said if you do not hire a person because they test positive for marijuana, you're breaking the law and you will lose in court every day of the week. You will lose. You cannot use that as the deciding factor. So it's a very difficult thing. I just want to touch on the WIRE program because I see a lot of questions on that. The WIRE program, unfortunately, when CREMA was passed and when the law came out, a lot of the things that were in the law didn't actually materialize, and the WIRE program is one of them. It's not. I'm first in line. I'm ready to take the training. I'm first in line, and I reach out all the time. Is it developed yet? Can I take the training? But it's just not. So the best practice, the best thing that we can do is to have that reasonable suspicion program, have it in place. If you have a CDL program, if you have CDL drivers, that the CDL DOT laws apply, which are federal, and that trumps the state CREMA law. So all bets are off there. With anyone who is a CDL driver, the federal laws apply, and recreational marijuana use is not permitted. So, there's a lot to it.
Jeanette, I know you mentioned the WIRE program, and I know that's the workplace impairment recognition expert. And I know we have a number of attendees who are on and who are waiting for that information like you are. But could you talk a little bit about what that is for those who are on and not sure what WIRE is? Thank you.
Sure. So when the law was originally passed, it mentioned in the law that people would be trained, they would be trained WIREs to recognize when a person is high. That's basically what it is. And the reason being, because the smell of marijuana is not enough. The training for it has never materialized. It hasn't come out yet. So it's kind of, what do you do in the meantime? The law is passed and is valid, and you will get penalized for not following the law, yet the things that they promised with the law originally aren't available for your use. So we're kind of all in a little difficult situation. So like I said, your organization should have written policies on it, and you should be adhering to them. I shared what we use, which are all based on best practices, and we've developed them with our attorney, and they are tried and true for us. They work for us. Your organization, every organization is different, but this is what works for us.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I know the WIRE has been a source of since the law came out. Everyone has been asking about that. Can you talk about specifically how you handle individuals who use CBD gummies and claim that is why they tested positive with different cutoff levels? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I can only talk about the policy that we have. We are a drug-free workplace. If we have reasonable suspicion, a person is tested under reasonable suspicion and fails, it doesn't matter. Medical marijuana card doesn't matter. CBD gun doesn't matter. If we have reason to suspect, that means we're documenting, because we don't have the WIRE, we're using our form, 2 people signing off. to kind of take the place of the wire, if you will, that reasonable suspicion form with a written process of 5 steps and 2 people. That is what we're substituting for the wire. If the person is positive and we have that reasonable suspicion form completed accurately, the gummy, it doesn't matter what it is. We have a drug-free workplace, that's our policy, and they would be terminated.
Okay, and Dr. Paris, does edibles or baked goods present themselves in a different way in marijuana in a person than smoking or using in other ways?
Yes, it does to some extent. So with smoking marijuana or vaping marijuana, you have a higher usual THC concentration that kind of peaks quicker and comes down quicker, but the peak effects are a little bit more psychoactive versus, a single gummy might have, a significant amount, but it gets absorbed into the body much slower. So the peak isn't as high and the duration is much longer. So not as psychoactive, and the clinical effects can be different based on that.
All right, thanks. And so much of that goes into then, what Jeanette spoke about document. I think if there was one thing that we got from your presentation, Jeanette, it was,
Have a policy and documents.
Yeah.
There's one question that I see that I did want to touch on if I could. I'm sorry. And the question was from Sherry Bell, and it said, what if you have a program funded directly by the federal government where marijuana is still illegal? And I can tell you for probably the first 2.5 years after CREMA came out, we hung our hat on that. We said, hey, we are a utility authority. We're getting federal money for this project, and we're getting federal money from FEMA for resiliency. And that's kind of where we hung our hat on not complying with CREMA. And as it turned out, it wasn't enough. That was not enough because you are entitled to a work. You have to have a drug. When you sign off for federal funding, you are signing off that you are compliant with a drug-free work environment, which we are. But that has nothing to do with the law being passed and a person, going back to that a glass of wine on a Saturday night mentality, a person who is using a marijuana substance on a Saturday night is not creating a workplace that is not drug-free. The workplace is still drug-free at that point. So under the law, we have to look at it that way. So, but Sherry, we use the same, like that was our thing that we held to for the, it took us a while to get where we are now. It's tough. It is tough to get there. It is tough to get there. But if you don't get there, the employment liability claims, you're exposed for employment liability claims under New Jersey law. It's very difficult times with this.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I know you're not an attorney, so we
No,
appreciate you
not at
sharing
all.
everything that has worked for you and, as you said, for your organization as really a best practice example. But can you talk about how you maybe respond if someone is showing impairment, but at the same time is claiming not to have used in the workplace, but had used the day before or the night before?
So it all goes back to that checklist. And one of the big things that I'm going to use is the smell of marijuana. If we come into a pre-shift meeting at 5:30 in the morning, we walk through 100 garbage men or garbage people, because there are a handful of ladies in there. But if we're walking through there, sometimes you get a little whiff. That's just the reality of it. You're going to get a little smell. And is it enough if you smell something to take that person in for reasonable suspicion? Now, I know myself, if I walk next to a person at Walmart, I might smell it, and that smell might transpose onto my sweatshirt or my hair, or sometimes you walk through an apartment building, you walk through and people are smoking outside, and just that cigarette smoke can get on your clothing or in your hair. So it's not enough. One thing by itself is not enough. You have to have multiple things. And it's not like you must have 8 of them checked, because there is no number. You have to have enough that a reasonable person would agree that that was enough information to suspect that person and to take them for testing. So a smell by itself is not enough. Red eyes by themselves is not enough. I saw a question, somebody asked about pupils. Do you have a before and after of their pupils? How do you know if they're dilated? I mean, you know your employees, and you know your coworkers, and you know if their eyes normally aren't red and they're red, or if they're normally not dilated and they're dilated. That's one thing, but you have to have more than that. You have to have enough that, I mean, I go back to, if this were questioned and you were in court, you have to have enough to substantiate what you're saying.
Thanks. And I just want to share that there are additional resources and information and sample policies available to all members of Drugs Don't Work in New Jersey. And you can go ahead and look in the toolkit for samples of all of that. I know, Jeanette, you are a member, and we have those resources available for your organization, but for all organizations, small to mid-size. So please, we're going to put that information in the chat on how you can access the toolkit. And I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time, so I wanted to give Dr. Paris the opportunity to leave us with a last thought or an important message that we can use.
Sure. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Jeanette, for all that really, practical information, things I don't think about every day. But overall, I saw that there were a few questions about drug testing in the chat. I just want to say that drug testing and levels can be very hard to interpret. Just like, the clinical symptoms someone is having. So, if you assume someone is intoxicated at work, what does that look like when, from a clinical lens? Is that truly intoxication or something else? Is it a different disease process, and correlating that with the appropriate drug testing. And with marijuana in particular, just the nature of marijuana itself and the fact that it partitions into fat, and there are many chronic users, and some people just live day to day with a certain amount that is detectable in their urine or blood or whatever, but does not correlate necessarily with acute intoxication. Again, it's just very nuanced, and they should get the proper expert in drug testing involved, legal counsel help as well. So a drug testing alone, can be, again, harder to answer than just a yes or no answer with some of the questions that were asked.
Thanks, Dr. Paris. And Jeanette, any last words or advice or comments for our attendees?
Sure. My last words of advice are to make sure that you have a written policy, make sure that all employees sign off on the written policy, and in lieu of having that wire, reasonable suspicion checklist and a written procedure. We have that 5-step observe, document. We have a 5-step procedure. It's written in lieu of that wire program. Have something in writing that you're going to be doing, and it protects the employees as well as you. Everyone is on the same page then. So document policies, and then documentation.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Thank you for both of our expert speakers say. I think the information that you both provided, obviously from different perspectives, but so important as we continue to navigate this very challenging time as we look at the law and in the workplace, right? What this means for our managers and businesses. Again, Drugs Don't Work in New Jersey provides these resources. So please, make sure you visit that toolkit, and we'll try to provide you as many updates as they come along as possible. We'll have an update on the legal aspects of this issue in early 2024. So we'll send that information out. In the meantime, October 6th is Knockout Opioid Abuse Day in New Jersey. Continues to be a problem and an issue that we're facing as well, especially with the emerging threats of fentanyl and xylazine. And so I invite you to join the webinar on October 6th on Knockout Opioid Abuse Day. Information is on the screen right now. We'll have a national expert who's going to be talking about the issue as we're seeing it in New Jersey and nationally, and how that impacts all of us within our communities, in our workplaces, and our families. So I hope that you can join us for that. And I hope that you can be part of Knockout Opioid Abuse Day. So many businesses have taken part in that day. And so I welcome you to visit the website and download some resources, or give us a call or send us an email, and we'll send you some materials you can hand out to your customers or your employees on that day. Thank you again to all of you who have joined us. I know we're coming to the end of our time, so I want to thank you. Information will be shared post-event on the slides and other information that was shared today. Thank you again to everyone, and have a good day.
Thanks for having us, Angela.
Thanks, Jeanette. Thank you, Dr. Paris.